Most people don't know what a dead man's trigger is, and even fewer need one. A dead man's trigger is a safety valve. For reasons of security, a person prepares a recourse of such severe action that if harmed, they will release a cache of damaging evidence against those enemies. Given his situation, Dr. Stephen Greer is one of those rare men. Why would he need one? He's not the first person to push the disclosure of a corrupt military-industrial agenda.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
In his final public speech, a farewell address, no less, in a time when every second on TV was priceless, United States President Dwight D. Eisenhower decided not to brag about his victory in the Korean War. Instead, he cashed in all his chips to warn this nation of a hidden enemy.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications.
When I was with Lawrence Rockefeller at his ranch in 1993, he turned to me and he said, "The implications of this are so vast and so profound that no aspect of life on Earth will be unchanged by its disclosure." I said, "Yes, Lawrence, that's why it's been kept secret. It's not because it's trivial, it's because the implications are so profound." So there have been attempts to bring this information out for over 60 years. And here we sit in 2012 with the world still burning oil and gas and coal, when we have had technologies, sciences, and all the information we need to have had a completely new civilization.
What Eisenhower warned us about over 60 years ago, according to Steve Greer, has long become truth in Washington, D.C.
And why is Washington, D.C. booming? Because the rest of the country is sending their money here.
My name is Ted Loader. I've been working with CSETI program and Dr. Greer for 15 years.
One always wonders if the public really knew what was going on with government covert programs and how much money has been put into it, hundreds of billions of dollars. I think the public would be a little annoyed.
Thomas Jefferson believed all men have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The government they formed would serve to secure those rights. But when corporations or other specialized groups of men become more powerful than those who govern, our security is at stake.
Thomas Jefferson wrote about unchecked power of the corporation being a threat to the democracy and the banks.
You see, the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank issues every dollar bill. Yet it is not run by the U.S. government or any elected official. It is owned by a private banking cartel.
But here I find the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who's in charge of the dollar, in charge of the money, in charge of what the money supply is going to be. The middle class is being wiped out, and nobody's understanding that it has to do with the value of money. Prices are going up. So how are you able to defend this policy of deliberate depreciation of our money?
A lot of it depends on what happens to the price of oil.
The four horsemen, or families of banking who own and run the Federal Reserve, also run the four largest oil companies. Oil is also used to make and run machinery and current mechanical technology. Of course, there's one industry that needs these more than anyone else: the military-industrial complex.
You begin to get into this very scary scenario that has to do with the human condition, of the proclivity to accumulate vast amounts of power around a handful of people.
All right, sit down and shut up.
And right now, these misanthropic sociopaths are running the planet into the ground.
When Congress or whatever else, or budget directors say we've lost $100 billion in black program, what does the public do? What can the public do? We can complain to our congressmen, but our congressmen can't get any information.
With lobbyists, interest groups, campaign funding, the economic powers that be have learned to control the political sphere.
These politicians become almost like placeholders, and they don't realize that until they get into the White House or into the Senate Intelligence Committee. It doesn't matter who the president is. They're going to do what they want to do.
And that which is good for them isn't always good for everybody else. From 1945 to 1998, 2,053 nuclear bombs exploded on this planet. The United States detonated over half of them.
When the first nuclear bomb was exploded in Trinity, Robert Oppenheimer, one of the founding fathers of the nuclear age, said, "We have done this before."
It could have been that Oppenheimer was speaking about weapons described in the ancient Sanskrit texts like the Mahabharata,
in which they refer to a bolt of iron charged with the light of 1,000 suns. This bolt of iron was hurled in anger and led to an explosive event which is very graphically described in this religious scripture, specifically showing all the key indications of radiation sickness and the various problems with nuclear weaponry that we've come to expect.
When we started detonating thermonuclear weapons, atomic weapons, and developing these sort of destructive technologies, the civilizations that have been watching this planet for millennia said, oh my God, these people are going way off the reservation. They are now an existential threat to themselves, but also to other planets potentially.
All over the world, we see very conclusive evidence that ancient people were in contact with extraterrestrial life. The Japanese said that their civilization was given to them by a people they called the Dogu, who came from what they described as Anemono Torebune, which translates as bird boat universe, meaning flying boats from the universe.
The ancient Sanskrit writings in India have elaborate descriptions of vimanas, or flying craft. These texts are thousands of years old. They predate any conception that we have of spacecraft or aircraft.
But evidence is not just found in ancient texts. It is also captured in our ancestors' art, as if it was plainly obvious that ET vehicles appeared in ancient skies. It is a foregone conclusion by most broad-minded people that we are not alone in this universe. The question is, how close are they?
And we all looked up at once. It was almost like an intelligence told us, hey, look over here, we're here.
We saw 3 red lights in a triangle almost directly overhead.
There's so much evidence out there that even if less than 1% is true, that would be enough to collapse the current paradigm and change the whole planet.
The whole concepts of the crossing point of light, the physics of consciousness, and interstellar communication all were developed on a kind of a vision quest we did here in 95 or 96.
Astronomer J. Allen Hynek developed a scale to identify the types of human ET encounters. From his original 3 categories, a 4th, more controversial, has been added, CE4. Even more controversial, Dr Greer added a 5th kind of encounter, CE5, human-initiated contact. So, how is this done? Given Schrödinger's idea that the number of all minds in the universe is 1, in order to make this type of contact, a human could potentially access that single inner consciousness through intense meditation and then visualize his location down through the Milky Way to the planet Earth, to wherever he sits under the stars. In theory, then, any extraterrestrial passing by would be able to hear the broadcast and know exactly where to go, if they choose to do so.
It's interesting how many people have never been out in a place like this where they can see the whole Milky Way galaxy. Most people who come for a week, it alters their life. Checking to be sure that there's no source from anyone else, so that when we do start having electromagnetic signals through this, we know that it's a legitimate source. Problem is not proving that UFOs exist. It's when you begin to expose the energy and propulsion systems behind how they're getting here. You're talking about unveiling an entirely new science that would replace oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, public utilities. And this is the $600 trillion problem.
So as a patent office, after they fired me, I had to wait 6 years before I got rehired. Everybody at the office was avoiding the case. But when they finally did, the arbitrator wrote an 85-page report on how the media had caused my dismissal. So I only got a 30-day suspension out of the whole thing, which was taken out of the tiny little bit of 6-year back pay. So that was great. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it made it all worth it, so to speak, because that's how we were able to open the offices and stuff.
It was very comfortable. No feeling of being shocked or anything else, just a good feeling, comfortable.
What scientists need to do, they need to look at the hardcore evidence, decide that, oh my gosh, ETs are real, and then get over that. And if that's the case, then you can start extrapolating, because they're getting here, which means they have solved the physics problem, if you will.
Though we experience inertial forces every day, their origins remain a mystery. However, there are theories that point to interactions between objects with mass and a quantum energy field.
Inertia is due to the zero-point energy interaction. So you're interacting with a charged matrix, which is a zero-point field. If you try to change that, then you get a reaction force. There must be an interference shield of electromagnetic nature that would stop that interaction with the zero-point field. And you can suspect that UFOs have already figured this out, because they wouldn't be flying around and still have inhabitants.
New energy scientists today are attempting to find new ways to define the relationship between electricity, gravity, magnetism, and propulsion. But as history has shown, change does not always come easy.
It's like Newton. Why is that apple falling? Nobody ever asked that question before, or even tried to come up with an answer. And Newton comes up with something called Newton bucket, or Newton's problem. The only guy that solves it 300 years later is Einstein. So, how smart can we be?
If you look at everything normal within the conventional wisdom, you're not going to learn anything new.
We're using a magnetic field that's rotating about the axis with the hope of generating a magnetic vortex.
That electric charge and gravitational mass are coupled, and that by building devices that harness these interactive forces, we could create advanced propulsion. Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison won the Nobel Prize in physics, but both refused it. Tesla was at the end of a long career of inventing. He had advanced technology in the fields of X-ray, radio waves, internal combustion, and of course, atmospheric electricity. When everything was said and done, he had earned 112 US patents. He proved that electricity can travel wirelessly in the air, and ultimately died penniless. However, his work did influence many others, most notably Lester Hendershot and Dr. T. Henry Moray. Hendershot invented a magnetronic generator to energize an impossible flight, if fueled by gas, that took Charles Lindbergh and the Spirit of St. Louis from New York to Paris. Dr. T. Henry Moray developed the Moray valve, a device for extracting radiant energy from the zero-point field, and demonstrated this device hundreds of times and had dozens of signed affidavits supporting his science. Yet in the end, even these two notable scientists were ignored and bullied. Dr. Moray's device was hammered down and broken into pieces by a competitor, and before he could finish reconstruction, he passed away of natural causes. Hendershot fled to Mexico to continue work, but was found dead at 61 years of age, attributed to suicide.
There is absolutely no question that T. Henry Moray had a system that produced 50 kilowatts out of a 55-pound box. The conventional electrodynamics model does not allow this to happen. In other words, it doesn't allow you to extract excess energy from the vacuum and use that to power your load. It costs just as much to restore it as was used to destroy it. So we got to put in more than we can ever get out in a load with such a squirrely circuit. And that's the only kind of circuit we've used in power systems since day one. We're still building them. We're still making power systems that deliberately kill them. So we pay the power company to have a giant wrestling match inside its generator and lose.
In the 1950s, there were some very provocative articles saying that, oh, electrogravitics is the best thing since sliced bread, how all the aviation companies are now backing electrogravitics, they're all doing experiments on it. Well, within a couple of years, there was no news at all.
Once they figured out that they could really control gravity, 1954, it all went black.
It was not the power of a cosmic field or quantum vacuum that would propel us into a new world. It was the mind.
This really is the opening to an entirely new science of consciousness.
You can maybe think of consciousness as a television set. On the TV screen, you see pictures and sounds and so forth. And if you tried to find out where that was coming from and you looked inside the television, you're not going to find it. It's not there. The signal is in the radio waves around it, invisible to us, that's being interpreted by the television as pictures and sounds. So this is very much like the state of how we understand the mind and consciousness.
Unfortunately, when you start to deal with inventors who have anomalous results that seem to be over unity, paranoia seems to accompany that process. And John Searle's famous for having a circular magnetic device that has both energy and propulsion built into one unit.
And the electric company felt that this guy was stealing money, took him to court, went to jail, his house caught fire, and all of his property and all of his designs burned.
The concept of freedom, this sort of idea of people having the liberty to pursue happiness and to pursue abundance, this has been completely, in a sense, turned upside down.
We actually reprinted a report on the military involvement of the Department of Energy. And it's so extensive, it's the major operation that goes on there.
There have been over 5,000 patents that have been sequestered by the national security state, taken out of the public domain. Many of them deal with energy technologies.
It's a policy that the military seems to feel is necessary for national security. However, at this point, we often wonder, 50 years after World War II and the Cold War, whether such sequestering is necessary.
Suppression of new technology would be an obvious plague on the idea and strength of a free market system. Yet, it still seems to happen right in front of our eyes.
And this is a huge controversy, one of the largest, maybe most intense controversies in the history of science. There's nothing worse, I found, than suggesting to academic physicists in particular, and academics in general, that they are not only wrong, but disastrously wrong, catastrophically wrong. Cold fusion patents have not been approved. They will not get through. American citizens are being denied their constitutional rights. I inadvertently was looking through some piles of paper that had been given to me in a casual manner by all these hot fusion physicists as they were trying to do their calorimetric repeat of the Pons-Fleischmann experiment. And I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like monkey business to me at the time, and it has turned out to be exactly that. It was represented as a negative result when it was positive. And that data is scientific fraud, as far as I'm concerned. It's been referred to legal authorities in the government. I asked for a review at MIT, got nowhere. If this type of manipulation had occurred in any legitimate research areas such as cancer research, AIDS research, global warming research, anything that's accepted as reasonable to be researching, the people would lose their jobs, they wouldn't be in science. And yet these people today, their data is used today, to year 2000 and all before, to reject patents. Yes, there is serious criminal activity going on that ultimately must be rooted out.
What we photographed up there affected me for the rest of my life and made a huge impact on my understanding of the universe and of governmental manipulation of our minds.
Governments must never lie to the people.
The number of people Dr. Greer had managed to get behind him was monumental. In a perfect world, an event of this proportion, with that amount of coverage, would have been enough to start a legitimate movement. But of course, we hardly live in a perfect world.
Say it when it's on, you know it, right? I don't know, guy. Everything's fucked up.
9/11 became the mother of all news stories and completely changed the game for everyone.
Fear, panic, and strife were imprinted in the public consciousness. To what end? Not to go after Al-Qaeda, but rather to invade the sovereign nation of Iraq. Given such a drastically overt misstep on the part of a U.S. government led by an oil family, the question on some people's minds is whether or not this disaster was exploited, or worse, engineered. The Gulf of Tonkin in the Vietnam War, Chiang Kai-shek in the Korean War. False flag operations are nothing new. However, according to some, the ultimate card to play might be yet to come.
How do you grow the trillion-dollar military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about into a $2 or $3 trillion program? You got to have a bigger enemy out there.
All of it is a lie.
99% of all the information out in the public on this subject is well-crafted disinformation designed to scare people to support the next phase in global warfare. And this kind of corruption is why the only things that are being made on this subject are things that redound to paranoia and fear in the military-industrial complex.
It is hard to concretely prove that 9/11 was a false flag attack, because the people behind it are so good at covering their tracks, especially with the compliance of the mainstream media. If you had trillions of dollars, you'd be pretty good at it too.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy. According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. $2.3 trillion in transactions.
According to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the #1 reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. I would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today.
I've forgotten what the second question was.
How does one carve out a billion unacknowledged or 10 billion unacknowledged taxpayer dollars? In many cases, at the end of a fiscal year, when there is so-called leftover money, they may or may not know that money may in fact go to a special access program.
There are two main types of special access programs: acknowledged and unacknowledged, or USAPs.
Those programs are basically totally off the books, and they are able to actually vacuum up money to be a self-perpetuating funding mechanism.
Certain USAPs are waived and also completely managed and controlled by private contractors, so they enjoy the secrecy protections only afforded to private corporations. There is virtually no high-level government oversight for these types of USAPs. In many cases, no elected official, including even the president, have knowledge a particular USAP even exists. Between 1947 and 1949, the government passed the National Security Act and the CIA Act. These laws allowed the intelligence community to withdraw money from any agency without disclosure. Essentially, money could be stolen from any program, and no elected official would ever know about it.
What we're seeing today is a world in which perception is being managed by as little as 5 major media corporations who collectively control magazines, newspapers, corporate news websites, television stations, movies, documentaries.
Who are these people? Who could be behind the curtain? Who could possibly be controlling us so effectively?
A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself.
Information has largely been controlled in a top-down way. What we're seeing now is the dissemination of discoveries coming up from the grassroots and not from a top-down centralized authority which has the ability to say, this isn't making it because we don't believe it's true, this is making it because it fits the mainstream.
The output milliamperage is more than the input milliamperage. It's a clear indicator of over-unity.
History has taught us that to simply innovate new technology may not be enough. We have to find a way to get past the suppression.
We've already now had a breakthrough just a couple months ago of the tritium battery. Finally, a company has come up with an actual commercializable unit, but it's very small. It's designed for an IC or some small circuit component. So this is a good sign because it shows the way to introduce a free energy device is to introduce a small version of it. If you have a revolutionary energy device, it has to be introduced in a way that doesn't look like it's a revolution.
These sciences have been around for decades. They have been ruthlessly kept secret because of the kleptocracy of what I call the petrofascists, the people who are hell-bent on maintaining the power of a centralized petrodollar, oil, gas, coal system. So that does create scarcity because that is a zero-sum game. But when you take us off that system onto this new system, it's an entirely new macroeconomic order, and scarcity becomes non-existent.
This is probably the most important thing going on this planet today, and yet nobody talks about it.
Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals.
The dam is in fact breaking, and you're beginning to see countries all over the world begin to come forward with what they know to be absolute fact.
What we've come to learn is this. We are standing at the precipice of a new age. There is power in the many, but only when they're acting as one. That's when resonance happens. Whether joining together as a responsible citizenry against the forces standing to divide us, or joining consciousness to unite with the beings who are prepared to communicate with us. In order to succeed in this endeavor called life, we must come together as one.
What we have to do is pave the way for these leaders. Because if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. They'll have to. And it isn't about overthrowing the Pentagon, it's about leaving it behind. The future is here already. The technologies are here, contact is happening. And if we come together as a people, what we're going to find is that all of us working together are going to be able to create a world that is amazing. If every single one of us told everyone we know that we're being visited by intelligent life, that the sciences are here to give us a new civilization, we're liberated from that macroeconomic slavery, but this is the destiny of humanity. Thank you very much. God bless you all.